My husband and his mistress ended up in the ER after too much fun. What the doctor revealed left them in tears. And before we begin, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because this story might change the way you see love, betrayal, and strength forever. The shrill ringing of the phone tore through the thick silence of the small Boston apartment at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. It was the kind of sound that any wife has learned to fear. The kind of sound that signals calls you prey you will never have to receive. In the hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, I reached out into the darkness, my fingers fumbling over the surface of the nightstand, knocking my glasses, a jar of cream, a hair clip, before finally touching the screen that was vibrating violently. My heart was already beating faster before I even managed to see who was calling. My brain automatically skimmed through all the worst scenarios people whisper about when it comes to a middle-of-the-night call. A car accident, a heart attack, my younger brother's son, my parents back in my hometown, or something even worse that I didn't dare to name. "Mrs. Carter?" A woman's voice came through, steady, clear, professionally polite. The kind of voice that has grown far too used to delivering bad news in the darkest hours of other people's lives. "This is the emergency department at St. Luke's Hospital. Your husband, Mr. Daniel Carter, was brought in tonight as an emergency case. Could you come to the hospital as soon as possible?" For a second, I thought I had misheard. The words, "your husband," an emergency case, refused to fit with the image of Daniel in my head. The gray suit, the bright smile, the glass of red wine in his hand, walking out the door at 7 p.m. for a late dinner with a prospective client. Something completely normal in his real estate brokerage career. Daniel was the kind of man who could come home late, but had never had to go to the emergency room. The call ended before I could ask anything else. The black screen reflected my face, messy hair, eyes not fully open but already wide in panic. A part of me wanted to break down and cry. The rest of me switched to autopilot. I put on whatever I could grab. The jeans hastily folded over the chair, the gray sweater that still smelled of fabric softener, the sneakers that still had bits of salt and grit stuck to the soles from last week's snow. I almost forgot my wallet, forgot my car keys, then turned back and dug through the tote bag I always kept at the foot of the bed. Every movement was fast, decisive, but underneath it was a slow, smoldering panic beginning to rise. The elevator moved unbearably slowly, the kind of slow that only shows up when you are racing against fear. The 12th floor hallway was terrifyingly silent, just the low hum of the heater and the sickly green glow of the exit sign at the end of the hall. Each of my footsteps rang out sharply against the tile, as if the whole building was listening to my panic. Outside, Boston was swallowed in cold, damp darkness. The streetlights laid lonely yellow streaks across snow that had turned gray. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel for a few seconds to steady myself. The clock on the dashboard flipped to 2:23 a.m. as I started the engine. The downtown streets at that hour were almost empty. A few taxis, a few delivery trucks. I drove nearly unable to remember each stretch of road, but my mind kept drawing worse and worse scenes. Daniel in an accident on the way home. A brain hemorrhage, a stroke. Lying motionless on a stretcher, tubes tangled everywhere. Then, a thought flashed through my mind, and I pushed it away almost automatically, like slapping myself inside my own head. Not the time to doubt, I told myself. Not the time to think about those late dinners with clients that stretched past midnight. The calls I had to make 3 or 4 times before he finally answered. His breath slightly rushed as he said, "I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back later." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white, as if I could crush that unease until it shattered and disappeared. The emergency department of St. Luke's Hospital was lit up like daytime when I burst through the glass doors. The fluorescent lights slammed into my eyes, cold and sharp like a blade. The bitter smell of disinfectant mixed with old coffee, sweat, and thick, heavy worry, so dense you could almost taste it on your tongue. A middle-aged man clutching his head in pain, a little boy with his arm wrapped in bandages, an elderly woman wheezing in a wheelchair. Each one was a separate story exploding at nearly 3 a.m. No one knew or cared that my world had just started to crack apart right at the intake desk in front of me. "I'm Claire Carter," I said breathlessly to the nurse behind the desk, who was typing something into the computer, dark circles under her eyes from the night shift. "My husband, Daniel Carter, was just brought in." She glanced at the screen, a few quick clicks, clearly too familiar with panicked faces like mine. "Yes, he's in treatment area A3. Come with me." Her voice was soft, but there was a layer of exhaustion underneath, like this was just one of hundreds of crises she had to walk people through every week. We walked past long white corridors, posters on the walls about stroke prevention, blood pressure control, routine checkups. Every closed door hid a different version of disaster. A baby crying, the beep of monitor machines, a doctor loudly calling out medication names, the rattle of carts across the floor. My shoes made dry clicking sounds on the tile, my heart beating in time with the beeping of some monitor in the next room. The nurse said as we turned a corner, her voice still holding the same professional calm. "The doctor has done the necessary tests. Please stay calm, he's stabilizing." My heart lurched. I suddenly felt guilty about the times lately I'd snapped at him for coming home late. The text messages where I'd replied with a short, "Okay, up to you," and then flipped my phone face down. Those little things suddenly felt meaningless next to the image of him lying on a stretcher. His heart stopped. I didn't know that fear, the fear of losing my husband, was only the first layer. The layer underneath, the thing that was about to flip my entire life upside down. When we stepped into Area A3, everything suddenly shifted into slow motion. The sound felt muffled. The light turned harsher. I saw Daniel before I even registered the details around me. He was lying there, on an emergency stretcher, skin pale, hair soaked with sweat. His body covered in electrodes connected to a monitor, drawing jagged lines on the screen. He frowned in pain, his lips dry and cracked, an IV line stuck into the back of his hand. For a very brief moment, the wife in me wanted to rush over, grab his hand, hold him. But then my eyes caught the person sitting beside his bed, her makeup smeared by tears and sweat. Mascara streaked in a black line under her eyes. Her lipstick was only a faint outline at the edges, the center already worn away. Her curled hair was a mess, strands stuck to her temples and neck. Her cream-colored blouse was wrinkled, the top buttons fastened in a hurry, and crooked, her neckline more open than it should have been for a normal work evening. Her tight pencil skirt had shifted, the hem twisted slightly to one side as if someone had pulled it in haste. She was holding Daniel's hand, holding it tight, like she was the one who had the right to do that. My throat went dry, not because of the disinfectant smell, not because of lack of sleep, but because I knew exactly who she was. Rachel Adams. The name flashed clearly in my mind, like a bright red neon sign. Daniel's close coworker, the girl who always laughed a little too long at his jokes at the company Christmas party. The one I'd seen standing closer to him than necessary in group photos on Facebook. Rachel, the woman I knew from his office year-end parties, from the stories he told about a smart employee, sharp, really understands clients. The one who, sometimes, when I caught the way she looked at Daniel from across the room, I'd felt a dull stab of pain, and then quickly scolded myself for being paranoid. And now she was here. After 2 a.m., in the hospital emergency department, sitting close to my husband's bed, her clothes disheveled in that exact way that any grown woman understands, means she's just been through something. The direct visual confirmation of what I had suspected, but never wanted to admit, hit me like a blow. My husband's work dinner was clearly something else entirely, and whatever medical emergency had brought them to the hospital together had happened under circumstances that made their relationship impossible to deny. The attending doctor walked toward us with steps that were firm but not rushed. Her shoes made soft clicking sounds against the polished white tiles of the emergency area. The fluorescent lights reflected off the small name tag on her white coat. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Emergency Medicine. Her eyes were not panicked, not curious, not surprised. They were the eyes of someone who had seen enough families fall apart on long nights like this one. "Mrs. Carter," she said, giving a slight nod in my direction, her voice calm, carrying a weight all its own. "Before we discuss discharge plans and further care, I need to make sure that the people present here fully understand the current medical situation." She glanced very quickly at Daniel, then Rachel, just one glance. But I saw it. She knew. Dr. Mitchell pulled the privacy curtain around Daniel's treatment area and reviewed her medical file with the careful attention required for an important diagnosis. The clinical environment, sterile lighting, monitoring equipment beeping steadily, the sharp smell of disinfectant, created a surreal backdrop for what was about to become one of the most devastating moments of my adult life. "Mr. Carter, Miss Adams." The way she said their names sounded more like reading a verdict than part of a medical procedure. "All the tests we performed tonight," she paused at exactly the halfway beat, "came back positive for chlamydia." I felt the air freeze. The monitor kept beeping steadily. "In addition, there is a secondary bacterial infection. This condition requires immediate antibiotic treatment." She turned another page in the file. I could see the lines of text, but my eyes could not read anything. "If treatment is delayed," she said, her voice neither higher nor lower, but heavy like a stone dropping into water, "the risk of complications is very high." The silence that followed her words was absolute and suffocating. Daniel did not move. His face went completely pale, as if all the blood had been drained from him in an instant. Sweat dotted his forehead, along his hairline. His dry, cracked lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Rachel was different. She raised both hands to cover her mouth. Her old nude-colored nail polish trembled. I saw her shoulders begin to shake. Then a sob escaped, very small at first, then growing louder. Not the kind of crying out of regret. Not the kind of crying out of shame. It was the crying of someone who had just realized that the price of a few stolen hours was not only moral, but her own body. For me, time seemed to come to a complete stop as I processed the implications of what I had just heard. My husband's affair was no longer just a matter of emotional betrayal. It had now created clear health risks, directly affecting me and potentially impacting the entire structure of our family. The abstract concept of marital unfaithfulness had been turned into test results, medical diagnoses, and a treatment plan that would require weeks of careful monitoring. Dr. Mitchell kept speaking. Her voice was steady, clear, professional. "The antibiotic treatment will last at least 2 weeks. During that time, intercourse should be avoided, and secondary symptoms must be monitored. Mrs. Carter," the doctor turned to me, her voice softening just slightly. "We also recommend that you get tested tonight, just to be safe." I nodded mechanically. Medical terms slid past my ears like rain hitting a glass window. I heard, but I wasn't really hearing anymore. A woman wearing a light brown blazer, her hair neatly tied in a bun, thin, silver-framed glasses. In her arms, she held a thick stack of papers, clipped together very carefully, stepped in, and broke the deadly silence. She smiled very lightly. "Sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice soft but very clear. "I just need to confirm some billing information with the family." She walked toward Daniel's bed. Her eyes flicked over him. Then Rachel. Then stopped on me. "Are you the card holder?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke. His voice was hoarse, weak, but clear enough for me to hear. "Yes, she's my wife." Before I could react, the coordinator placed the stack of papers down on the stainless steel table beside the bed. The sound of paper hitting metal made a small clack, but in my ears it hit like a hammer. "We've processed the emergency deposit." The payment was made using your debit card. I blinked. Once, then twice. I thought I had misheard. Excuse me? My voice was dry. She flipped the first page toward me, tapping lightly with her index finger. Cardholder name, Claire Carter. Payment processed at 1:51 a.m., including emergency fees for Mr. Carter and accompanying patient. Accompanying patient. No need to name her. No need to explain. I looked down at the paper. Rows of numbers, transaction codes, timestamps, a line of black printed text, clear as day. I felt like someone had used my own wallet and slapped me across the face with it. I turned to Daniel. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if the fluorescent light up there was more interesting than facing his wife. My bank account, the money I earned through my nonprofit management career, had been used to pay for medical treatment caused by his affair. The symbolism was brutal and exact. I was literally paying the price for my husband's betrayal, both financially and medically. This violation felt total and calculated, as if every part of our shared life had been used against me. I bent down and picked up Rachel's cashmere coat lying on the floor, the one I had given her last Christmas because she was invited to my family's party. I folded it neatly, placed it on the chair arm, and looked straight into her eyes for the first time since walking in. You know, Rachel, my voice was light as a whisper, this amount of money is enough to fund college tuition for 3 orphaned children. Now it's flowing into your veins. How does it feel knowing you're worth exactly the same as a scholarship for 3 poor kids? Rachel shrank in on herself, tears falling onto the back of her trembling hands. Daniel reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped back just enough that he touched only air. Don't touch me, I said, my voice sweet. You're sick. I turned and walked back out into the hallway. This time, no one dared to call my name. Standing in the sterile hospital corridor, gripping my sweater so tightly my knuckles ached, I went through a moment of absolute clarity, cutting through years of deliberate blindness and excuses. I have a client meeting tonight. This weekend I have to go to a conference. Tuesday, I'll be home late, difficult client. I can't pick up, it's loud here. Each memory lined up, neatly, like evidence in an interrogation room. All the times I pushed away my instincts, told myself, don't be paranoid, scolded myself, don't ruin the marriage with negative thoughts. I chose trust, instead of confronting. I chose fake peace, instead of unpleasant truth. And now, I was standing in a hospital hallway at nearly 3 a.m, knowing my bank card had just been used to pay the bill for my husband's betrayal. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. The smell of disinfectant filled my lungs. Cold, dry, clear. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking, how do I save this marriage? But, how do I save myself? That moment wasn't loud. No tears, no drama. Daniel's attempts to speak, to explain, to downplay the situation, were met with a clarity so sharp that even I was surprised by it. Don't, I said to him with a firmness that came from deep inside my subconscious. Not here, not now, not anymore. Stepping out of the treatment area and into the main hospital corridor, I felt the weight of 10 years of marriage pressing down on my shoulders, like a burden I was finally ready to set down. The fluorescent lights, which had always felt harsh and institutional, suddenly became bright in the most literal sense of the word. Everything was becoming clear in ways I had avoided for far too long. The ride home passed in silence, broken only occasionally by Daniel's attempts to explain or apologize, those efforts falling like stones into a deep abyss, slipping into the empty space between us. His shame was visible and genuine, but it had nothing to do with the decisions I was making about the future of our relationship. At home, I moved into the guest bedroom, a physical separation that marked the beginning of a legal and emotional process that would eventually lead to the dissolution of our marriage. This symbolic act was crucial to me. I was no longer living alongside someone who had completely disregarded my health, my trust, and my financial security. The following weeks became a series of doctor's appointments, tests, and legal consultations, turning my daily routine into a structured process of protecting my health while preparing for divorce. My doctor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, confirmed what I had feared, that I too had been infected, making Daniel's betrayal not only emotionally damaging, but physically harmful to my health. Sitting in the waiting room with antibiotic prescriptions and follow-up testing procedures, I experienced a profound shift in how I understood my autonomy and self-worth. I was no longer a wife dealing with marital problems. I was a woman taking decisive action to protect her health, finances, and future from a man who had proven he was willing to sacrifice all of it for his own immediate gratification. My consultation with divorce attorney Linda Harrison provided the legal framework for what was already an emotional certainty. Linda's office, filled with law books and certificates showing her expertise in family law, became the place where I learned about asset division, alimony calculations, and the possibility of pursuing damages for marital misconduct, especially since Daniel had misused my financial resources. For the first time in many weeks, I felt empowered rather than victimized. The legal system offered mechanisms to address the specific harm Daniel had caused, while medical treatment provided clear protocols to restore my physical health. The road ahead, though challenging, was now illuminated and achievable. I walked into the living room, opened the MacBook, and turned the screen toward Daniel. On the screen was the divorce petition package already prepared, my signature and Linda Harrison's signature already placed on the last page, only waiting to be filed with the court. I pushed the laptop closer so he could read every line clearly. Daniel, you have exactly 72 hours to pack your things and get out of this apartment. The prenuptial agreement we signed in 2012 is still fully valid. Clause 14.3. Adultery accompanied by health risk and misuse of joint finances nullifies all property rights of the offending party. That means you don't get a single cent from the house, from the investment fund, from the stocks I bought with my own salary. Daniel's hand shook so badly that the glass of water on the table trembled with it. His face went pale, without a trace of blood. Claire, can we talk? Do you really want to destroy everything just because of one mistake? His voice cracked, trying to cling to the sweet tone that had softened me for 10 years. I closed the laptop, the dry click sounding like the final strike of a judge's hammer. Calling his systematic deception, health endangerment, and financial abuse one mistake showed he still fundamentally misunderstood both the scope of his betrayal and the lasting nature of its consequences. My answer came from the clarity I had accumulated over the weeks since that night in the emergency room. Daniel, I replied, with the calm authority of someone who had moved past anger and into action, you risked my health, betrayed my trust, and used my money to fund your unfaithfulness. That is not a mistake. It's a series of choices that revealed who you really are. And I no longer want to build a life with someone who makes those choices. Daniel collapsed to his knees on the wooden floor, tears streaming down his face. The first time I had ever seen him cry like a child. Claire, I'm begging you. Can we go to marriage counseling? I'll change. I swear. I picked up my car keys, put on my cashmere coat, and walked past him without even looking down. Too late, Daniel. You had plenty of chances to change. You just didn't. Now I'm just changing your address. Out of my life. I opened the front door, the hallway light spilling in and casting his pathetic shadow long across the floor. 72 hours. After that, the locks will be changed. The security cameras are on 24/7. If you try to break in, I'll have another criminal case to play with. The door closed behind me with a final, decisive click, sweeter than any verdict I had ever heard in my life. Daniel's career began to collapse when news about the emergency room incident and his relationship with Rachel spread throughout the office. Rachel, it turned out, was not only his lover, but also his direct subordinate, creating HR violations that triggered a full internal workplace investigation. 3 weeks after the hospital night, I sat in a small cafe on Newbury Street, a glass of black cold brew with no sugar in front of me, watching my phone screen vibrate nonstop. A message came from Ashley, the HR director at the real estate company where Daniel worked. "Claire, you need to know this. The board has just opened an official investigation into Daniel. They discovered the relationship between Rachel and Daniel. It completely violated the sexual harassment and abuse of power policy. They also found company card hotel payment history, 11 times in 4 months, all during business hours." I took a sip of coffee, bitterness spreading across my tongue. Just 20 minutes later, an internal email was leaked into the company group chat. 187 recipients. A glaring red subject line. Notice of unpaid suspension. Daniel Carter. Effective immediately. The content was brief, cold like a scalpel. Sexual relationship with a subordinate employee. Misuse of company card for personal purposes. Creating legal risk and damage to company reputation. Internal and external investigations underway. All client communications for Mr. Carter to be reassigned immediately. I zoomed in on the screenshot and saw Daniel's name bolded, like a living obituary. At 3 p.m. that same day, Daniel video called. His face was sunken, stubble growing unevenly, a light gray hoodie, no trace left of the perfect man. Behind him was a 38-square-meter studio in South End he had hastily rented, bare walls, only a single bed, and a suitcase still unopened. "Claire, I've been suspended indefinitely." His voice broke, no confidence left from the man who used to stand before hundreds of clients. "They took all my email access, the company card, even my parking spot. I have nothing left." I let him talk without interrupting. I could clearly hear him crying. The crying of a 41-year-old man who had just realized that the world he built over 15 years could collapse with a single click. Daniel's once respected reputation had now become a burden the company could no longer carry. Rachel quietly left both the company and the city, her career and reputation destroyed by a relationship that had promised excitement but delivered only consequences. The gossip that followed her departure felt like a collective acknowledgement from the entire community that those actions had consequences far beyond the people directly involved. Friends and family showed up fully for me, revealing the real strength of relationships built on genuine care instead of obligation. My sister flew in from Chicago, bringing wine, practical advice, and an unconditional loyalty that had carried me through childhood and would now help me through the most challenging transition of my adult life. The book club I had neglected in the final months of my marriage welcomed me back with understanding and encouragement. Colleagues at the nonprofit organization where I worked made space for flexibility, allowing me to arrange medical appointments and legal meetings without damaging the career I had maintained throughout my marriage. These relationships, sustained by mutual respect and real affection, stood in complete contrast to the transactional dynamic my marriage had seemed to become. That contrast brought light and healing in ways that helped me understand what I wanted to prioritize in future relationships. The months following the divorce proceedings brought challenges I had not anticipated: grief for the life I thought I was living, anger at my own deliberate blindness, and the practical difficulties of building an independent household after 12 years of shared living. Yet those difficulties came alongside discoveries that surprised me with their richness and satisfaction. I began running, at first as a form of stress relief, but gradually as a source of physical achievement and mental clarity. The early morning miles through Boston neighborhoods gave me time to reflect, helping me process the emotional complexities of rebuilding my identity as a single woman approaching 40. Therapy with Dr. David Smith, a counselor specializing in trauma recovery and relationship transitions, provided frameworks for me to understand how my marriage had deteriorated and strategies to avoid similar patterns in future relationships. The process, though difficult, ultimately brought liberation, because it helped me recognize my own agency in creating the life I wanted instead of only reacting to circumstances created by others. My career at the Boston Children's Fund, which had been neglected somewhat during the divorce, was now revived as I poured all my energy into work that was meaningful and aligned with my values. The grant writing and program development skills I had honed over more than a decade in the nonprofit world suddenly felt far more valuable and impactful than they ever had when they were secondary to maintaining a turbulent marriage. The promotion to program director came with heavier responsibilities and financial autonomy, making me realize how much professional potential I had wasted in the name of keeping domestic peace. Peace that, in the end, had been nothing more than an illusion. The recognition from colleagues and the tangible impact our programs had on local families brought a kind of satisfaction that was genuine and lasting. The financial independence that came with career advancement also provided practical security, turning my divorce settlement into a foundation for growth rather than compensation for loss. I was building something new, not merely recovering from something broken. Living alone for the first time since graduating college uncovered interests and preferences that had been buried beneath the compromises of marriage. I discovered I liked cooking vegetarian meals, that I enjoyed documentaries Daniel always dismissed as boring, and that I had a talent for interior design that had previously been restrained by his traditional aesthetic preferences. The apartment I created for myself, filled with books, plants, and art, reflecting my personal taste instead of marital compromise, became a true sanctuary in a way no shared space ever had. The quiet of Sunday mornings, the freedom of planning without negotiation, and the absence of the tension that had been the background noise of my marriage created a peace I had forgotten was possible. Friends who visited all remarked that I looked different, more relaxed, more confident, more present in conversations. A personality once muted by the need to manage marital dysfunction was emerging again with a kind of energy and honesty that surprised even me. 1 year after the horrific night in the emergency room, I found myself reflecting on how crises can serve as catalysts for positive change if approached with courage and clarity. The betrayal that initially seemed to destroy my life was actually the exposure of a life that had already been damaged beyond repair. Daniel's actions forced me to face the truth about our relationship that I had deliberately avoided through willful blindness and misplaced loyalty. The scene in the emergency room, no matter how humiliating, provided undeniable evidence that made continuing to deceive myself impossible. The health crisis born from his infidelity became the foundation for a comprehensive approach to wellness that included not only medical treatment, but also therapy, exercise, and self-care that I had neglected for years by prioritizing marital stability over personal health. 18 months after we finalized the divorce, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Daniel's relationship with Rachel had ended badly, that his career never recovered from the professional scandal, and that he was facing financial difficulties that made paying spousal support increasingly burdensome. Although I felt no satisfaction in his ongoing struggles, this information confirmed that his choices, prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term stability, had led to natural consequences that extended far beyond their impact on our marriage. His pattern of poor judgment was clearly consistent and ongoing. Meanwhile, my life had settled into routines and relationships that brought real satisfaction and lasting joy. The book club became a source of intellectual stimulation and friendship. Running evolved into participating in charity races that combined physical training with fundraising for causes I cared about. My work continued to provide financial security and a genuine sense of purpose and value. What I took from this experience was that self-respect cannot be maintained through loyalty to people who fundamentally do not respect you. The energy I had invested in preserving a marriage that only existed in my imagination was now being used to build a life that truly reflected my values and priorities. The discovery in the emergency room that first felt like the worst night of my life ultimately became the catalyst for the best decision I ever made. The decision to choose myself over a relationship that was systematically undermining my health, finances, and sense of self-worth. The call at 2:17 a.m. was indeed an emergency, but not the kind I had imagined during that terrifying drive through Boston. It was an urgent intervention into a life that was slowly being destroyed by a man I loved, but who clearly did not love me enough to protect me from the consequences of his choices. The woman who answered that call, and the woman who rebuilt her life afterward, were separated not just by time, but by the hard-won wisdom that only comes from surviving betrayal and choosing maturity over bitterness. The emergency room was the beginning of my healing process, not only from a sexually transmitted disease, but from a relationship that had been slowly poisoning my life for years. That horrific night became the foundation for everything good that followed. Proof that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you can also be the best, if you have the courage to see clearly and act accordingly. If this story touched you, or reminded you that your worth is never defined by someone else's betrayal, tell me in the comments. Have you ever chosen yourself after someone broke your trust? Your story might help someone else feel less alone. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story.